On Christmas Eve, my son looked at me across my own dining table and told me I didn't deserve a gift. He said it calmly, almost politely, as if he were correcting a child. And while the Christmas lights blinked softly behind him and the room sat frozen in silence, I understood something I had been refusing to see for months. I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak. Not because I didn't know what to say. But because I already knew what I was going to do. If you are someone who finds comfort in quiet stories about family, about growing older, about loving people who sometimes hurt you the most, then stay with me. This story isn't loud. Doesn't rush. And it doesn't pretend things don't hurt when they do. My name is Ruth Dawson. I am 73 years old. I am a mother and a grandmother. And until last Christmas, I believed that no matter how complicated life became, family would always come back to love. I was wrong. Christmas Eve had always been sacred to me. Not because of gifts but because it was the one night of the year when time seemed to slow down. When people sat long enough to remember who they were to each other. When phones were set aside, and memories had room to breathe. That year I had spent 3 full days preparing. Not because anyone asked me to, but because that is what mothers do when they want their children to feel welcome. I scrubbed floors that were already clean. I polished silverware that rarely left the drawer. I went back to the grocery store twice because I forgot the cranberry sauce Eddie loved as a child. My home smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon candles. The Christmas tree stood tall in the corner of the living room, decorated with ornaments that my late husband, Ray, and I had collected over the 40 years of our marriage. Each one held a memory, place we visited, a year we survived, a moment that mattered. Ray had been gone for 2 years by then. 2 years of waking up to an empty bed. 2 years of cooking meals for one. 2 years of learning that grief doesn't leave. You simply learn how to live around it. Eddie had been my anchor after Ray died. He called every day in those first months. Check on me. Sat with me on the porch and let me cry without trying to fix anything. But somewhere along the way something changed. I told myself it was marriage. Newlyweds need time. That's what everyone says. Give them space. Don't cling. Be understanding. So I tried. When Eddie and his wife Maureen arrived that evening, I hugged my son tightly at the door. For just a second I felt him again. The boy who used to run through this house barefoot. The teenager who hugged me goodbye before school, even when his friends were watching. He smelled like the same cologne Ray used to wear, and for one fragile heartbeat, I believed everything might still be okay. Maureen stepped inside behind him without slowing. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning my living room the way someone takes inventory and not admiring. Assessing. Dinner was quiet. Eddie talked about work. Asked questions. Maureen scrolled through her phone, barely touching the food I had spent hours preparing. I noticed the bracelet on her wrist. Delicate gold with small stones that caught the light every time she moved her hand. It looked expensive. Far more expensive than anything her boutique job should have allowed. I noticed her purse too. Designer. Pristine. The kind you buy when money doesn't feel real. I said nothing. Mothers learn early that questions will only wound us further. After dinner, we moved to the living room for gifts. The tree lights blinked softly, casting a warm glow across the room. I handed Eddie a small box first. Inside were the keys to a used BMW I had been saving toward for months. Not because I owed him anything. Not because I wanted his approval. But because a mother's love does not disappear just because her heart has been bruised. When he opened it, his face went blank. Then his eyes widened. "Mom," he whispered. "A BMW. You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," I said softly. He hugged me. Real hug. The kind that reminded me of the boy he used to be. For a moment, hope flickered again. Then I handed Maureen her gift. A designer handbag. She opened it, glanced at it briefly, took a photo with her phone, and set it on the couch beside her like it was a throw pillow. No thank you. No appreciation. Just dismissal. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Despite everything, despite the coldness that had been growing between us for months, I still hoped. I still believed that maybe they had thought of me too. Maybe something was waiting for me under the tree. Something small. Something symbolic. Something that said I mattered. Eddie cleared his throat. He shifted in his seat and wouldn't look me in the eye. "Mom," he said slowly, "we didn't get you anything this year." The words hung in the air. I blinked, certain I had misheard him. But he kept talking. "Moran thinks," he said, gesturing toward his wife, "that you need to learn to give without expecting anything in return." Moran leaned back against the couch, arms crossed, a small satisfied smile playing at the corner of her mouth. The room felt smaller suddenly. "The lights are too bright." The warmth I had worked so hard to create felt hollow. I could have cried. Part of me wanted to. But I didn't. Because beneath the shock and the hurt, something else stirred. Clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I didn't ask why. Instead, I nodded gently and reached toward the drawer beside my chair. And as my fingers brushed against the envelope I had placed there weeks earlier, I realized that Christmas Eve wasn't the beginning of this story. It was the moment everything I had been quietly enduring finally came into focus. The first sign that something was wrong had come months earlier, long before Christmas lights and wrapped presents. It began with silence. Eddie used to call me 3 or 4 times a week. Just quick check-ins while he drove to work or made his morning coffee. Nothing deep. Nothing dramatic. Just a son letting his mother know she still existed. "Hey Mom, just calling to say hi. Did you see that storm coming through? Make sure the shutters are locked." Small things. The kind of things you don't appreciate until they stop. In September, those calls became less frequent. A week passed. Then 2. Then nearly a month slipped by without a single word. I told myself he was busy. Newlyweds build their lives together. That's healthy. But mothers know. We feel distance the way you feel a storm before it arrives. Something shifts in the air. Something tightens in your chest. One morning, I walked into my kitchen and saw the basket of oranges sitting on the counter. I had bought them because Eddie loved fresh squeezed juice when he was little. He used to stand beside me while I cut them in half, waiting like it was liquid gold. But now they sat there untouched. I realized the only reason I still bought them was for a son who no longer came around. I threw them away that afternoon. All of them. The house felt different after Ray died. Bigger. Quieter. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you turn on the television just to hear another human voice. Eddie had been my anchor during that time. He called every day after the funeral. Checked on me. I made sure I was eating. Sat with me while I cried. But marriage changed him. Or maybe it wasn't marriage. Maybe it was Moran. First, I tried to be understanding. Becoming part of a new family isn't easy. But the signs were there. Easy to dismiss if you wanted. To lie to yourself. Like the time Eddie mentioned coming over for Sunday dinner and cancelled an hour before because Moran had plans. Or the time I invited them to a gathering at my friend Janice's house. Eddie said yes. The morning of, Moran texted me directly. "We won't make it. Eddie needs rest." Not "we decided." Not "sorry." Just a statement. I stared at that message for a long time. I wanted to call Eddie and ask if he even knew she had cancelled for him. But I didn't. 'Cause I was afraid of the answer. Mothers are taught to be patient. To give space. To trust that love will bring your children back. What they don't tell you is that sometimes space becomes distance. And distance becomes abandonment. By late September, I hadn't seen Eddie in nearly 6 weeks. I tried texting him. Casual things. Nothing desperate. "Hope work is going well. Saw your favorite show is back on. Miss you, sweetheart." He replied hours later. Sometimes the next day. "Busy. Thanks, Mom. We'll see." Short. Polite. Distant. One evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sun set over the neighbor's roof. The Florida air was warm, even as the rest of the country began pulling out sweaters. I thought about calling Eddie. Really calling him. But I didn't know what I would say without sounding like I was begging. So I stayed quiet. And that, I would later realize, was where my mistake began. The first time I realized something was truly wrong wasn't when my son stopped calling. It was the moment I stopped dialing his number myself. I noticed it one evening in early October, sitting alone at my kitchen table with my phone face down beside my plate. Dinner had gone cold. I hadn't touched it. I kept glancing at the phone, waiting for it to light up, waiting for his name to appear on the screen. And then, without consciously deciding to, I pushed the phone farther away. That was new. For most of my life, I had been the one who reached out first. The one who checked in. The one who kept the thread of connection from unraveling completely. Mothers are taught that if a relationship with a child weakens, it's because they didn't try hard enough. We didn't give enough space. Or we gave too much. We hovered. Or we disappeared. Either way, we blame ourselves. That night, though, something inside me hesitated. I thought about how many times I had already reached out that month. Texts left unanswered for hours. Calls that went straight to voicemail. Replies that felt like obligations instead of affection. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped trying to hold everything together by myself. The answer came quickly. Nothing happened. Days passed. Then a full week. The silence didn't break. It settled in, heavy and unmoving, like fog that refuses to lift. Kept myself busy. I always had. I cleaned closets that didn't need cleaning. I reorganized photo albums, lingering over pictures of Eddie as a child, smiling, sunburned, proud of a missing tooth or a crooked science project. I baked bread I didn't eat. I watered plants that didn't need watering. Anything to avoid sitting still long enough to feel what was happening. The house had felt different ever since Ray died, but now it felt watchful. Too quiet. Every sound seemed louder because there were so few of them. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. At night, I left the television on longer than usual, not because I was watching, but because I needed proof that another human voice still existed somewhere nearby. One afternoon, I decided to drive past Eddie's old school. I don't know why. Nostalgia, maybe. Or habit. The building hadn't changed much. Same brick walls. Same playground. I remembered waiting in my car during his first week of kindergarten, watching him walk inside without looking back, so eager to be independent. I remembered feeling proud and a little lost at the same time. I wondered when that pride had turned into distance. It was near the end of October when Eddie finally texted me. "Hey Mom. Sorry I've been quiet. Busy couple of weeks." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew what I wanted to say and was afraid of how it would sound. "I understand. Hope you're doing well," I typed. He responded hours later. "Thanks." That was it. No question about me. No suggestion of seeing each other. No warmth. Just a period at the end of a sentence that felt like a door closing softly but firmly. I told myself not to read into it. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that this was what adulthood looked like, that children grow up and away, and mothers are supposed to accept it gracefully. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just distance. It was a replacement. The first time I sensed Morin's influence clearly was during a Sunday afternoon call I had with Eddie in early November. He had finally answered when I called, sounding distracted but polite. "We're thinking of stopping by sometime," he said. "If we have time." If we have time. The words landed harder than he probably realized. "I'd love that," I said. "Any day works for me." There was a pause on the line. I could hear someone speaking in the background. Morin's voice, low and quick. "Well," Eddie said slowly, "Morin wants to talk to you about something." My stomach tightened. "About what?" He hesitated. "The house." Course it was. "She thinks," he continued, "that it might be a good time for you to consider downsizing. Less stress. Less upkeep." I stood very still in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear. "I like my home," I said carefully. "It's where your father and I built our life." Another pause. Longer this time. "She just thinks it would make things easier," he said. "For everyone." For everyone. I wanted to ask who everyone was. I wanted to ask why my comfort suddenly mattered less than their convenience. I wanted to ask when my home stopped being my home and became a topic for discussion between my son and his wife. But I didn't. "I'll think about it," I said instead. When I hung up, I stood there for a long time staring at the wall. My reflection in the darkened window looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. I felt a strange mix of sadness and anger, though neither one had fully formed yet. They came over the following Saturday. I woke up early that morning and cleaned, even though the house was already spotless. Old habits. The things mothers do when they want their children to feel welcome. I changed the hand towels in the bathroom. I set fresh flowers on the dining table. I made Eddie's favorite meal, roast chicken with garlic, mashed potatoes, and cornbread. The same dinner I used to make every Sunday when he was growing up. When they arrived, Eddie hugged me at the door. It was quick, polite. The kind of hug you give someone you're obligated to see, not someone you miss. Morin stepped in behind him, wearing sunglasses even though the sun was already setting. She slid them up onto her head and glanced around my home the way someone inspects a hotel room they're not sure they want to stay in. "Smells good," Eddie said, trying to sound cheerful. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "Go ahead and sit. Dinner's almost ready." Morin wandered slowly through the living room, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She paused near the bookshelf, running one finger along the edge as if checking for dust. Then she turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know, Ruth," she said casually, "this house is really big for one person." Paused, oven mitt still on my hands. "It's the house Ray and I built together," I said quietly. "It holds a lot of memories." She shrugged, examining her nails. "Sure, but practically speaking, it's a lot to maintain. You'd probably be happier somewhere smaller." Eddie stood by the dining table, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He didn't say anything. He didn't meet my eyes. I set the roasting pan down slowly. "I like my home," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not ready to leave it." Morin smiled again. That same tight smile. "Of course. Just something to think about." But it wasn't a suggestion. It was a seed. Dinner passed uneasily. Eddie complimented the food. He ate like he always had, mixing too much butter into his mashed potatoes, smiling faintly as if remembering something. For a few minutes, he looked like my son again. Morin picked at her plate, scrolling through her phone, barely pretending to be present. That was when I noticed the bracelet again. Delicate gold. Small stones. The kind of thing you don't buy on impulse. I thought about her job at the boutique. Part-time. Entry-level. None of it added up. I said nothing. After dinner, Eddie helped me carry plates to the kitchen. Just the two of us. For a brief moment it felt almost normal. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," he said softly. "It was really good." "You're always welcome here," I said, touching his arm. "You know that." He nodded, but his eyes flicked toward the living room, where Morin was calling his name. He left the kitchen quickly. I stood at the sink rinsing dishes, listening to their voices drift from the other room. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. "This place could sell for so much," Morin said. "We need this." Not maybe. Not it would help. "We need this." My hands stopped moving. The water ran over the plate I was holding, but I didn't feel it. I stared out the kitchen window into the backyard. The same yard where Ray and I used to sit with coffee on Sunday mornings. The same yard where Eddie learned to ride his bike. And in that moment something settled into place. They weren't thinking about what was best for me. They were thinking about what they could take. When they left that night, I stood at the door and watched them walk to their car. Morin was already on her phone before she even got in. Eddie looked back once, just once, and gave me a small wave. Then they drove away. The house felt emptier than it had before they arrived. I sat down in Ray's old chair and stared at the wall, Morin's words replaying in my mind. "We need this." That was when I understood that my silence wasn't protecting the peace. It was allowing something dangerous to grow. And for the first time I began to consider a thought that frightened me more than loneliness. What if my son were being used? By the time I overheard my daughter-in-law talking about my house like it already belonged to her, I knew silence would no longer protect anyone. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, a few weeks after that uncomfortable dinner. Out of nowhere, Eddie called and invited me to their apartment for a small cookout. Nothing fancy, he said. Just burgers. Just spending time together. The invitation startled me so much I almost dropped the phone. Really? I asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. Yeah, he said. We've been busy, but it would be nice. It was the first time in weeks he had sounded even remotely like himself. And because he was my son, and because mothers are experts at lying to themselves when hope is involved, I said yes. I spent that morning preparing as it mattered. I made potato salad the way Eddie liked it, with extra mustard and celery. I bought a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford. I chose a blouse that made me feel put together, even though no one there would notice. Their apartment was small, a 2-bedroom rental near the highway, the kind of place young couples live while saving for something better. Eddie greeted me at the door with a smile that looked almost genuine. Maureen glanced up from her phone and nodded. Oh, hey, Ruth. Not warm. Not cold, just neutral. We sat on the small balcony where Eddie had set up a tiny grill. For a while it felt almost normal. He talked about work. He laughed. He told me about a coworker who reminded him of his father, and for the first time in months, he said Ray's name without his voice tightening. Maureen stayed inside on her phone. Then she stepped out onto the balcony, phone pressed to her ear. I need to take this, she said, already walking away. She moved toward the edge of the parking lot, near the fence that separated the complex from the neighboring property. Eddie turned back to the grill, flipping burgers. He didn't notice anything unusual, but I did. The wind carried her voice just enough. No, he doesn't suspect anything, she said quietly. Froze. Eddie was humming to himself, completely unaware. Once the house sells, everything will fall into place, she continued. I just need him to convince her. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stood there holding my iced tea, my hands suddenly unsteady. Maureen laughed softly into the phone. She won't see it coming. Eddie glanced up. Everything okay? He asked me absently. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. Maureen returned moments later, slipping her phone into her pocket as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me. That same tight, confident smile. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I don't remember what we talked about. I don't remember how the food tasted. All I could hear were those words repeating in my head. Once the house sells. Not if. When. When it was time to leave, Eddie walked me to my car. Thanks for coming, Mom, he said. It was really good to see you. I hugged him tightly. I love you, I said. Love you too. I drove home in silence, my thoughts racing. Who was she talking to? What plan? What house? My house. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about greed. This was a scheme. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maureen's smile. Heard her voice. Once the house sells. The next morning I called my friend Janice. Janice had been part of my life for over 40 years. She was there when Ray proposed. She held Eddie when he was born. She stood beside me at Ray's funeral. If anyone would understand what I was feeling without making me sound paranoid, it was her. She answered on the second ring. Ruth. Everything okay? No, I said quietly. I need your help. She didn't ask questions. Come over, she said. Right now. I told her everything. Distance. The dinner. The comments about my house. The phone call I overheard. When I finished, she sat very still for a long moment. Ruth, she said gently, this isn't something you guess about. You need to know the truth. But how? Yes. I can't accuse her without proof. Eddie would never forgive me. Janice nodded. I know someone. A retired police officer. He does private investigation work now. Quietly. Professionally. The idea made my stomach twist. Hiring someone to investigate your own family felt like crossing a line I never imagined myself approaching. What if I'm wrong? I whispered. Then you'll know, Janice said. And you can let it go. But if you're right and you do nothing, you'll never forgive yourself. She was right. I called the investigator the next morning. His office was small, tucked above a tax preparation service in downtown Naples. He was older than I expected, calm with kind eyes. That told me he wouldn't dramatize what he found. What you're describing sounds like a pattern, he said after listening carefully. Expensive purchases, pressure to sell property, private phone calls. These aren't random. So you think I'm right? I think you deserve to know the truth. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I tried to distract myself, cleaned, baked. I organized closets that didn't need organizing. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped. Eddie texted once. Hey Mom, hope you're doing okay. We'll try to visit soon. We'll try. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what the investigator would find. Part of me hoped he would find nothing. That I was just a lonely widow imagining danger where there was none. But another part of me knew better. Mothers sense storms long before they arrive. On the 14th day my phone rang. Mrs. Dawson, the investigator said. You should come by. My hands started shaking. What did you find? Yes. There was a pause. I think it's better if we talk in person. I drove to his office in silence. When he placed the folder on the desk between us, my heart sank. Before we begin, he said gently, you should brace yourself. The first photograph showed Morin standing outside a restaurant, smiling up at a man I had never seen before. His hand rested on her waist. Too familiar. Too comfortable. This man owns a real estate firm, the investigator explained. There were more photos. Hotels, dinners, receipts, cash purchases, designer items far beyond her income. Then the email. The one where she wrote about the house. About convincing Eddie. About selling while I was still healthy and persuadable. About divorce. About moving on. My hands shook so badly I had to set the paper down. She's planning to leave him, I whispered. Yes, he said. After she gets what she wants. In that moment everything became clear. She wasn't just after my house. She was using my son. And I knew then that I couldn't stay quiet any longer. But I also knew something else. I couldn't rush this. Because if I did, Eddie wouldn't hear me. And the truth, when it finally came, had to be undeniable. The truth did not arrive all at once. It settled into me slowly, like cold that seeps into your bones before you realize you're shivering. I sat in my car for a long time after leaving the investigator's office, staring at the steering wheel with the folder resting on the passenger seat. Inside it were photographs, receipts, printed emails, proof of lies carefully planned and patiently executed. Evidence that my daughter-in-law wasn't simply selfish or materialistic. She was calculating, methodical, and worst of all, she was using my son's love as a tool. I thought about Eddie as a child. The way he used to sleep with the hallway light on because he was afraid of the dark. The way he cried the first time he scraped his knee and insisted I kiss it better, even though he was too old to need that. The boy who once told me very seriously that he would never let anyone hurt me. And now, without realizing it, he was helping someone do exactly that. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light felt deliberate. Every stop sign stretched time. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there staring at the front of my house. The house Ray and I had saved for. The house we painted together. The house where we built a life, one ordinary day at a time. She wanted it. She wanted the money. The leverage. The future could buy her. And she was willing to destroy my son to get it. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the investigator's words echoing in my mind. After the divorce is finalized. He still doesn't suspect anything. This will all be worth it. I realized something then that changed the way I saw everything. Morin wasn't in a hurry because she was in love. She was in a hurry because time was her enemy. And if time was her enemy, then patience could be my weapon. The next morning I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the attorney that the investigator recommended. A woman who specializes in estate planning and asset protection. Her voice was calm, steady, and unflustered when I explained my situation. "You're not powerless, Mrs. Dawson," she told me. "You just need to make sure your wishes are protected legally before anyone pressures you into decisions you don't want." Her office was downtown, all glass and polished floors. The kind of place that made you feel like everything inside it was serious and permanent. She listened carefully as I told her everything. The pressure, the manipulation. "The plan is to sell my house. We can set up a living trust," she explained. "You retain full control of your home while you're alive. No one can force you to sell. And when the time comes, it transfers according to your conditions." "Conditions?" "Yes." She nodded. "You can protect your son's inheritance from a spouse. You can ensure that anyone who tried to manipulate you doesn't benefit." For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Control. Not over other people. Over myself. We started the paperwork that day. The second phone call I made was to Eddie. Kept my voice light. Normal. Maternal. "I was thinking," I said. "It's been so long since we've spent Christmas Eve together. Would you and Morin like to come for dinner?" There was a pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. "That sounds nice," he said cautiously. "Let me check with Morin." Course. An hour later the reply came. Not from Eddie. From Morin. "That works for us," she wrote. "I'd also like to talk about the house while we're there. Christmas Eve would be a good time." I stared at the message. She couldn't help herself. Even in a simple dinner invitation, she saw an opportunity. Leverage. Stage. She thought Christmas Eve would pressure me. That sentimentality would soften me. That Eddie would sit there beside her and help convince me to sell, surrounded by decorations and memories I wouldn't want to let go of. She thought she was walking into a negotiation. She had no idea she was walking into a reckoning. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed slowly. I prepared quietly, carefully. I didn't rush. I didn't confront. I didn't warn Eddie. I knew that if I did, he would defend her. Love makes liars feel safer than the truth. Instead, I focused on what I could control. The house was legally protected within days. Filed. Locked away in a way Morin could never touch. Then I prepared the rest. I contacted a dealership about a used BMW. Eddie had mentioned wanting a nicer car months earlier. Something reliable. Something he could be proud of. I chose one that was a few years old, well-maintained and clean. Paid for it outright. No loans. No strings. I wanted him to see that my love for him hadn't changed, even if my boundaries had. For Morin, I bought a designer handbag. Elegant. Expensive. The kind she would show off. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed her to feel comfortable. Confident. Unthreatened. I needed her to believe she had already won. At night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the folder of evidence spread out before me. I studied every photograph, every receipt, every email. I memorized the timeline. I read the words she had written about me, about my house, about persuading me while I was still healthy. The betrayal stung, but something else grew stronger with each passing day. Resolve. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I was preparing to tell the truth. But the truth, I had learned, had to be presented in a way that couldn't be denied. 3 days before Christmas, I picked up the BMW from the dealership. They tied a large red bow on the hood and wished me a Merry Christmas. I drove it home slowly and parked it in the garage, hidden from view. That night, I wrapped Morin's handbag in expensive paper with a silk ribbon. I made it look thoughtful, personal, like I was still trying. The night before Christmas Eve, I barely slept. I lay awake thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if Eddie didn't believe me? What if he chose her anyway? What if I lost him completely? But then I thought about the alternative. If I stayed quiet, she would take everything. My house, my son's future, his trust, his self-respect. And I knew I couldn't live with that. Christmas Eve morning arrived warm and clear. Florida air drifting in through open windows. I made coffee and sat on the back porch watching the sunrise. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. Felt ready. Cooked all day. Eddie's favorite foods. The ones he loved as a boy. I set the table with the good china. I placed the gifts under the tree. Then I took the large envelope and placed it in the drawer beside my chair in the living room. Out of sight. Waiting. At 6 o'clock sharp, I heard the car pull into the driveway. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Eddie stood there holding a bottle of wine. Morin beside him, phone in hand. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I replied. As they stepped inside, I realized something with surprising calm. Whatever happened tonight, I would walk away knowing I had done the right thing. Because silence had protected them long enough. Tonight the truth would speak. Christmas Eve didn't begin with anger. Began with hope. Eddie stepped inside my house and looked around as if he were seeing it for the first time in years. Tree. Table. The familiar warmth he had grown up with. For a moment, his shoulders relaxed, and I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be. The boy who ran through these rooms laughing. The boy who believed this house was the safest place in the world. Morin walked in behind him, already scanning, measuring, calculating. Her eyes lingered on the walls, the furniture, the windows. I recognized that look now. I had seen it too many times to mistake it for admiration. Dinner passed slowly. I served the food. Eddie complimented it politely, genuinely. Morin barely touched hers, glancing at her phone between bites, checking the time as if she had somewhere better to be. I watched them both carefully, noticing the distance between them. The tension Eddie didn't seem to understand yet. The confidence Morin carried like armor. When dinner ended, Eddie offered to help clear the table. In the kitchen, just the two of us, he hesitated. "You really didn't have to do all this, Mom," he said quietly. "I wanted to," I replied. He nodded, but something in his eyes told me he was already bracing himself. He knew the evening wasn't just about food and memories. Morin had likely prepared him, softened him, told him what to say. We returned to the living room, where the tree lights blinked softly. The gifts sat beneath it waiting. "Should we do presents?" Eddie asked, forcing a smile. I nodded and reached for the small box first. "This is for you," I said, handing it to him. He looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," I repeated. He opened the box slowly. When he saw the keys, his face went blank. Then his eyes widened. "Mom, are these?" "Go look in the garage," I said gently. He stood unsure and walked to the side door. When he opened it, I heard his breath catch. "A BMW," he called out, disbelief and emotion colliding in his voice. He came back into the room, eyes glossy, holding the keys as if they might disappear. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. He hugged me then. Real hug. Grateful. And for a moment I wondered if maybe, just maybe, this could still end without breaking him. Then I picked up the second gift. "And this is for you, Morin." She took it without standing, opened it carefully, admired it, took a photo, set it beside her. "Cute," she said. That was all. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Eddie cleared his throat. "Mom," he began, not meeting my eyes. "About your gift." He shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't get you anything this year." I smiled faintly. "Oh." Morin leaned back, arms crossed, that familiar satisfied expression settling on her face. "It's important," Eddie continued, voice rehearsed, "to learn to give without expecting anything in return." The room went quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. Instead, I nodded slowly and reached into the drawer beside my chair. My hand didn't shake. I placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. Eddie frowned. What's that? If tonight is about lessons, I said calmly, then let me teach one. Morin's smile faltered. Go ahead, I said. Open it. Eddie hesitated, then reached for the envelope. As he pulled out the first photograph, the color drained from Morin's face. What is this? Eddie asked, confusion creeping into his voice. He flipped through the contents. The photographs, the receipts, the printed emails. His hands began to tremble. Morin, he whispered. Who is this? She lunged for the envelope. This is ridiculous. Your mother is trying to turn you against me. But Eddie was already reading. The email. Plan. The words about the house. About persuading me. About selling while I was healthy. About divorce. About moving on. You were going to leave me, he said quietly. Silence. You were going to leave me after you got the money. Morin's composure cracked. We needed that house, she snapped. She doesn't need all that space. We deserved it. The room seemed to tilt. Eddie stood abruptly. Get out. What? Get out, he repeated, voice shaking but firm. Now. She stared at him, disbelief giving way to fury. She grabbed her purse, the designer bag, and stormed toward the door. You'll regret this, she hissed. You're choosing her over me. No, Eddie said softly. I'm choosing the truth. The door slammed. The house fell silent. Eddie stood frozen for a moment, then collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with sobs that tore through him. I sat beside him and placed my hand on his back. I'm so sorry, Mom, he cried. I didn't see it. I let her treat you like nothing. You trusted someone you loved, I said gently. That doesn't make you weak. He looked up at me, eyes red. You protected me. I did what a mother does, I replied. Even when it hurts. Later that night Eddie stayed. In his old room. The one I had never changed. As I sat alone in the living room, the tree lights blinking softly, I felt something settle into my chest. Christmas Eve hadn't given me what I wanted, but it gave me what I needed. Clarity, boundaries, myself. And as I turned off the lights and went upstairs, I knew this truth would stay with me forever. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's a strategy.